February 12, 1873. President Ulysses S. Grant signs a routine coinage bill into law. Congress had debated it across 5 sessions, 3 full years of discussion, amendments, and revisions. No one objected. No one protested. The legislation passed without incident. 3 years later, miners in Nevada arrive at the U.S. Mint carrying bags of silver bullion, expecting to exchange their metal for freshly minted dollars, as they'd done for decades. Instead, they're turned away at the door. The mint is closed to silver, and they never saw it coming. By 1878, Congressman Richard Bland stands before the House of Representatives and declares the Act of February 12, 1873 was a fraud, stealthily passed without reconsideration and without debate. Millions would come to believe him. But was it conspiracy or something far more complex? Welcome to the Wealth Timeline, where we uncover how money, power, and history are woven together to shape the world we live in. Today's story begins with a single piece of legislation that redefined American currency, devastated the working class, ignited a political firestorm lasting 2 decades, and set the stage for one of the most famous speeches in American history. This is the story of how a technical adjustment to mint procedures became the crime of 1873. So, to understand the crime of 1873, we must first understand what America's money looked like in the decades before. Since Alexander Hamilton established the nation's monetary system in 1792, the United States operated on bimetallism. Both gold and silver served as legal money. You could take either metal to the mint and have it coined into currency. A silver dollar contained precisely enough silver to equal $1. A gold coin held its equivalent weight in gold. The ratio, 16 ounces of silver for every 1 ounce of gold. It was elegant, it was stable, and it was about to become obsolete. Between 1861 and 1865, the Civil War shredded this system. To finance the war effort, President Lincoln authorized the printing of paper money, greenbacks, unbacked by gold or silver. Inflation followed. The metallic coins people trusted disappeared from circulation, hoarded away as their paper value diverged from their metal content. During and after the war, actual silver and gold coins became rare sights in American pockets. By 1869, Treasury officials recognized that the Mint Act of 1837, written before the California Gold Rush, before the Civil War, before the entire Western mining boom, no longer reflected economic reality. The system needed revision. But who would write the new rules? And what would they mean for millions of Americans who didn't yet know their money was about to change? In 1869, Treasury Secretary George Boutwell assigned Deputy Comptroller of the Currency John J. Knox a straightforward task: revise the outdated coinage laws. Knox was a careful bureaucrat, not a schemer. He consulted experts, reviewed foreign monetary systems, and drafted a comprehensive update to U.S. mint operations. In April 1870, he submitted his bill to Congress. It was 67 sections long, the virtual codification of every law relating to mints and coinage. Buried in Section 15 was a list of silver coins the mint would produce: the trade dollar, the half dollar, the quarter dollar, the dime. Conspicuously absent, the standard silver dollar. Section 17 made it explicit: no coins would be issued except those listed in Section 15. The silver dollar, the coin that had existed since 1792, was deleted from American currency. But here's what critics would later discover. The silver dollar had not been in meaningful circulation since the 1840s. When silver was undervalued relative to gold at the 16-to-1 ratio, people simply didn't mint silver dollars. They sold their silver on the open market instead, or sent it overseas where it fetched better prices. The silver dollar had become, as historians would note, a coin unknown to most Americans. Knox didn't hide the change. The bill was publicly debated in Congress across 3 years. It was discussed in committee. Treasury officials testified about it. The full text was available for review. Senator John Sherman of Ohio, a powerful figure in American finance, guided the legislation through Congress. Yet almost no one grasped its implications. Why? Because in 1873, silver was expensive. At market rates, silver traded above the 16-to-1 ratio. No rational person would take silver to the mint to be coined at that fixed rate when they could sell it for more on the open market. Eliminating the silver dollar seemed like bureaucratic housekeeping, removing a coin that no one used anyway. On February 12, 1873, President Grant signed the Coinage Act into law, and then everything changed. In 1873, German unification was complete. The new German Empire promptly made a fateful decision: stop minting silver thaler coins and shift to a gold standard. Germany began selling its massive silver reserves onto world markets. Simultaneously, prospectors in Nevada, Colorado, and across the American West struck silver, vast quantities of it. The Comstock lode alone would produce millions of ounces. New mines opened monthly. American silver production surged. The laws of supply and demand are merciless. In 1873, The market ratio of silver to gold was 15.9 to 1. By 1874, it climbed to 16.1 to 1. By 1875, it reached 16.6 to 1. Silver was losing value fast. Western miners, flush with silver from booming mines, prepared to convert their bullion into coins at the mint. They expected to receive silver dollars at the old 16 to 1 ratio, profiting handsomely from the spread between the legal mint ratio and the declining market price. Instead, they discovered Section 15 of the 1873 Act. The mint would not accept silver for standard dollar coinage. Only the trade dollar, a special coin intended for foreign commerce, would be minted, and even that had limitations. Silver producers were devastated. The market value of their metal was dropping, and now their safety valve, converting it to legal tender coins at favorable government rates, had been sealed shut. But the economic carnage had only begun. September 18, 1873. The banking house of J. Cook & Company, one of America's most prestigious financial institutions, declared bankruptcy. Cook had overextended his firm financing the Northern Pacific Railway, a transcontinental railroad venture that promised to connect Duluth to Seattle. When Cook couldn't sell enough railroad bonds to cover his investments, his bank collapsed. The failure triggered a cascade. Within days, other banks followed. On September 20th, the New York Stock Exchange closed for 10 days, an unprecedented emergency measure. Financial contagion spread like wildfire. In New York, 25% of workers lost their jobs. Factories shut down. Businesses failed by the thousands. The Panic of 1873 plunged America and Europe into what contemporaries called the Great Depression. A title it would hold until the 1930s gave us an even grimmer comparison. The economic downturn lasted until 1879, a brutal 6-year contraction that economists would later identify as the longest such period in American history. Here was the terrible irony. The Coinage Act had contracted the money supply by ending silver coinage just as the economy desperately needed more currency in circulation. Deflation took hold. Prices fell. Farmers who had borrowed money to buy land and equipment now owed debts in dollars that were becoming more valuable, while their crops sold for less. The same dollar borrowed in 1870 cost far more to repay in 1875. For workers, nominal wages declined by 1/4 during the 1870s, and in some places by half. For farmers across the South and West, falling crop prices combined with fixed debt obligations created an impossible squeeze. In all of this, the bank failures, the depression, the deflation, the suffering, became entangled with one question: who killed the silver dollar and why? March 2nd, 1876. George M. Weston, Secretary of the U.S. Monetary Commission, published a letter in the Boston Globe. His accusation was explosive. The demonetization of silver was a conspiracy by the creditor class against the common people. Weston's letter attached the word crime to the 1873 Act for the first time. It spread like wildfire. On August 5th, 1876, Missouri Congressman Richard Bland, soon to be known as Silver Dick, stood before the House and declared the Act of February 12th, 1873 was a fraud because its title gave no clue to the real intent of the Act. The record shows that the Act was stealthily passed, without reconsideration and without debate. The accusation wasn't entirely accurate. The bill had been debated across 5 congressional sessions over 3 years, but Bland's charge tapped into something real. Almost no one in Congress had understood that eliminating the standard silver dollar would, within years, create a gold-only monetary system. By 1878, even Congressman Samuel Hooper, who had introduced the bill into the House, stated, "I was ignorant of the fact it would demonetize the silver dollar." How was this possible? The answer lies in timing and incentives. In 1873, no congressman feared losing silver coinage because silver was expensive. No one wanted to coin it anyway. By 1876, when silver prices collapsed and miners desperately needed the mint to buy their metal, the door was already bolted shut. Conspiracy theories flourished. Critics blamed British financial writer Ernest Said, alleging he had been paid by English bankers to manipulate the American bill and ensure the gold standard as dominance. The story was dramatic. Foreign agents corrupting American democracy for profit. It was also false. Said was actually an ardent bimetallist who had objected to silver's demonetization. He had submitted analysis of the bill at Congressman Hooper's request, arguing that silver should be retained. But the myth persisted, and millions believed it. The real story was more mundane and perhaps more troubling. American lawmakers had passed a technical revision of mint laws without fully understanding its economic consequences. When those consequences materialized, they were catastrophic. The West turned against the East. Silver-producing states like Nevada, Colorado, and Montana felt betrayed by Eastern financial interests. Farmers throughout the South and Midwest, crushed by deflation and debt, saw the gold standard as a tool of oppression. Colorado Senator Henry M. Teller gave the conspiracy its permanent name. On July 10, 1890, he declared from the Senate floor, "The fight for free coinage is on, and it will stay on too. till the will of the people shall be heard in the enactment of a law that shall put silver back where it belongs, and where it would have been, but for the blunder or the crime of 1873. The crime of 1873, the phrase stuck. But would the Silverites get their revenge? The political backlash was immediate and sustained. Western miners, Southern farmers, and Eastern workers formed an unlikely coalition demanding silver's restoration. In 1878, Congress responded, sort of. The Bland-Allison Act, passed over President Rutherford B. Hayes's veto, required the U.S. Treasury to purchase between $2 million and $4 million of silver bullion each month and mint it into silver dollars. It was a compromise, and it satisfied no one. Silver advocates had wanted unlimited free coinage and the ability to bring any amount of silver to the mint and have it coined at the old 16-to-1 ratio. Instead, they got limited government purchases. The Treasury, controlled by gold standard supporters, consistently bought the minimum amount required. Gold advocates, meanwhile, feared even these limited purchases would reignite inflation and undermine financial stability. They lobbied for repeal. The silver question didn't go away. It intensified. In 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which increased mandatory silver purchases to 4.5 million ounces per month, roughly the entire American silver output. But the act allowed the government to buy silver with Treasury notes redeemable in gold, which created a perverse incentive. Holders of these notes could drain government gold reserves by demanding redemption in gold rather than silver. This set up a monetary time bomb that would detonate in 1893. The Panic of 1893 was even more severe than the Panic of 1873. Bank failures multiplied, unemployment soared. Contemporary estimates reached 25% in some areas. Farmers went bankrupt. Their farms were sold to pay debts. Some of the impoverished died of disease or starvation. Others took their own lives. President Grover Cleveland, a Democrat who supported the gold standard, blamed the Sherman Silver Purchase Act for draining gold reserves and spooking investors. In 1893, he demanded and received the act's repeal. Silver advocates felt betrayed by their own party. But the silver movement was far from dead. It mutated into something more powerful, a populist crusade that would reshape American politics. The Populist Party emerged, uniting farmers, laborers, and silver miners under a common banner. They didn't just want silver coinage. They wanted fundamental reform of a system they believed was rigged against ordinary Americans. They demanded railroad regulation, direct election of senators, graduated income taxes, and government intervention to protect workers and farmers from the predations of big business. At the center of this movement stood one man, William Jennings Bryan, July 8, 1896, the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The party was fractured. President Cleveland's support for the gold standard had alienated huge sections of the Democratic base. Delegates were determined to nominate a silver candidate, but they didn't have one. Then William Jennings Bryan took the stage. Bryan was 36 years old, a former Nebraska congressman with minimal national profile. But he had spent 2 years crisscrossing the country, speaking to farmers and workers, building support for silver, and he knew how to hold a room. His speech lasted 36 minutes. He cast the silver question not as a technical monetary debate, but as a moral crusade, a battle between the common people and moneyed elites who would crucify them on a cross of gold. "We have petitioned, and our petitions have been scorned," Bryan thundered. "We have entreated, and our entreaties have been disregarded. We have begged, and they have mocked when our calamity came. We beg no longer, we entreat no more, we petition no more, we defy them." Then came the finale, the lines that would echo through American history. "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." The convention hall erupted. Delegates tore off their coats and flung them into the air. Grown men wept. The next day, Bryan was nominated for president on the 5th ballot. The 1896 election became a referendum on monetary policy, and much more. It was a contest between visions of America. Republican William McKinley, backed by Eastern industrialists and bankers, defended the gold standard as sound money, stable, trustworthy, respectable. His campaign was lavishly funded. He didn't travel. Supporters came to his home in Ohio for carefully orchestrated front porch meetings. Bryan, by contrast, logged over 18,000 miles, delivering hundreds of speeches to millions of people. He represented farmers, miners, workers, Americans who felt the system had betrayed them. McKinley won, and not narrowly. He carried the industrial Northeast, the Midwest, and even made inroads in the Silver West. The populist coalition wasn't broad enough. Urban workers, despite their economic struggles, didn't trust inflation. Immigrants in northern cities feared that cheaper money would erode their wages. On March 14, 1900, President McKinley signed the Gold Standard Act into law. It fixed the dollar at 25.8 grains of 90% pure gold and required the Treasury to maintain a $150 million gold reserve. Silver was finished as a monetary metal in the United States. The crime of 1873, it seemed, would stand. But here's the twist. Bryan lost every presidential election he entered, 1896, 1900, and 1908. Yet many of the reforms he championed eventually became law. The income tax, direct election of senators, tighter regulation of railroads and banks, the Federal Reserve System. These progressive-era reforms reshaped American government, expanding its role in protecting ordinary citizens from concentrated economic power. Bryan's monetary policy failed. His broader vision succeeded. The gold standard itself lasted only another 3 decades. The Great Depression of the 1930s shattered it. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took the United States off the gold standard, nationalizing private gold holdings and abandoning the fixed gold-to-dollar ratio. In 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the dollar's last link to gold, completing the transition to fiat currency that Lincoln's greenbacks had begun a century earlier. Today, every major currency is fiat money, its value determined by government policy and market confidence, not by the weight of metal backing it. The monetary system that the crime of 1873 helped establish is gone, but its legacy remains. So what do we take away from the crime of 1873? First, technical decisions have moral consequences. The Coinage Act wasn't written by villains in a smoke-filled room. It was crafted by competent bureaucrats trying to modernize outdated laws. But when those technical adjustments hit a changing economic reality, they devastated millions of people. The farmers crushed by deflation, the miners who saw their livelihoods evaporate, the workers whose wages collapsed. They weren't abstractions in an economic model. They were human beings whose suffering was real. Second, democracy requires understanding. The Coinage Act passed because almost no one understood what eliminating the silver dollar would mean once silver prices fell. Lawmakers voted for a bill they hadn't fully comprehended. By the time the consequences became clear, it was too late to reverse course without igniting a political firestorm. Complex policy demands careful scrutiny, not just from experts, but from everyone it will affect. Third, the crime of 1873 reveals a deeper truth about monetary policy. Money isn't neutral. Who controls its supply, how it's created, what backs it? These aren't just technical questions. They're questions of power. The gold standard favored creditors over debtors, the East over the West, established wealth over upstart enterprise. That's why the fight over silver lasted a generation. That's why Bryan's Cross of Gold speech still resonates. The battle wasn't really about gold versus silver. It was about who gets to shape the rules and who benefits when the rules are shaped. The crime of 1873 wasn't a crime in the legal sense, but it was a betrayal. Of farmers who needed inflation to ease their debts, of miners who needed markets for their silver, of workers who needed a monetary system flexible enough to respond to economic crisis. And when the people felt betrayed, they fought back. Not with violence, but with votes, speeches, and organizing. They lost the monetary battle, but won the broader war, transforming American government in the process. Because in the world of wealth and power, history never ends. It just changes hands. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter of history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the Wealth Timeline, and turn on the bell icon. Because the next story might just rewrite what you thought you knew about power.